At some point, we've all known that person.
Oh my god, I love your skirt. Where did you get it?
It was my mom's in the 80s.
Vintage. So adorable.
Thanks.
That is the ugliest effing skirt I've ever seen.
Who you think is your friend, but in reality,
she is a mythic bitch.
My name is Kiri Callaghan, and today we're talking about frenemies. The following video is brought to you by the amazing Rachel Smythe's insane work ethic to give us an awesome story that's free to the public. If you'd like to help support this hardworking artist, check out her Patreon through the link in the description below. Today we're talking about Thetis. Sort of. Like many characters in mythology, Thetis' identity varies depending on the myth. She's cited as a sea nymph, one of the 50 Nereid daughters of the sea god Nereus, and even one of the earliest deities worshipped in archaic Greece through oral traditions, which the records of which have pretty much lost at this point. There is apparently an early Alcman hymn. Alcman was a very early Spartan choral lyrical poet. And in this hymn, it identifies Thetis as the creator of the universe, which I find very interesting, but isn't really relevant to what we're talking about. But hey, learning, right? If you love your Greek mythology, you probably most famously know Thetis as the mother of Achilles, who was the most awesome human warrior except for that whole heel thing, which probably is relevant, but let's put a pin in that briefly. What is also potentially relevant is that if she is one of those 50 Nereid daughters, her father was one of the manifestations in the Iliad that Poseidon supposedly supplanted to become the sea god when Zeus overthrew Cronus. And you know who else is one of those 50 Nereid daughters? Amphitrite, Poseidon's wife, which, depending which lore you're writing, means Thetis is potentially a sister-in-law to Poseidon. Now, stick with me, because in the original myths, it said that Thetis was loved by both Zeus and Poseidon, but they pieced out and told her to marry human because there was this prophecy that she would bear a son who was mightier than his father. Gods. Now, why is this important? It might not be, but all of this has the potential to inform this adaptation of the character. Note, I said potential. It's always up to the author to decide in an adaptation what they choose to keep, what they choose to change, what they choose to throw over their shoulder like spilled salt. All we know about the lore Olympus adaptation of Thetis at this point is she's Zeus's secretary and basically right-hand woman. For all I can tell, she probably does most of the work, knowing Zeus. Whatever. She's had multiple affairs with Zeus. Each time he said it's the last, and clearly she knows better. She and Minthe are friends. She's very calculated. Well, that last one is true, but I'm realizing I'm trying to name identity facts rather than personality. So in mythology, her future husband has to bind her tightly in her sleep so she can't shapeshift to escape, which, look, Greek mythology has major consent issues. Let's not try to skirt around that elephant in the room. But I find this interesting because it does seem that instead of Thetis shapeshifting her form, her personality is what shapeshifts, because we've seen her be very manipulative. She can be whoever she needs to be in order to survive or come out on top. She's very calculated in all her movements, and she has a very unnerving ease when it comes to manipulating those around her, especially her so-called friend. Why? We don't know yet. We really don't know anything about Thetis' backstory, but I would reference back to some of the things we said about Minthe when I first talked about her, because, again, no one just becomes
a mythic bitch.
You develop into that usually as a form of survival tactic. Sometimes it's due to past trauma, and sometimes it's due to the fact that some people find it easier to manipulate those around them than to genuinely empathize. There's a bunch of reasons that could be informing Thetis' actions, but since we don't really know a ton, I'm going to try to avoid speculating too much. What we can say pretty safely is that Thetis operates on control and needing to control things, and is often fueled by jealousy. We've seen it in action multiple times, and Minthe is the friend she seems to punch down on when she needs to feel better about herself. I don't think we can just write her off as a sociopath for so many reasons, but even in this episode, we see her react to not getting the same attention from Zeus that Hades is giving to Minthe. She even tries to call Zeus and is told very violently that she was never to call there again, and when she gets that ego hit, it's only then that she decides to take malicious actions towards Minthe and sabotage her. And were their roles reversed, Minthe would very likely have done the same. Not only are the two very much cut from the same cloth, from what I can tell, but they're pretty much the textbook definition of frenemies. They're both covering insecurities by lashing out and bullying those around them, because not only does it give the illusion of being safe from being harmed, but misery truly does love company. When we fall into this trap of comparing ourselves to everyone around us, there is a weird hollow comfort knowing everyone is doing as poorly as you are. Not only is there this sense of camaraderie, but you feel like less of a failure. It's not because of you that you're in this situation. The cards are stacked against you, and that's why you're miserable. And to be fair, in Minthe and Thetis' case, the cards are stacked against them. Let me be very clear on that. It's tangentially related. But Thetis and Minthe, while bitter and awful people, are nymphs trying to survive in a god's world. They are considered to be lesser, just by the nature of what they are. We approach worlds like this with a sort of fantastical notion of, but these are literal gods, they have more power, etc. Of course they're lesser, but stop for a moment and put this in a more real-world context. If you considered magic or power to be synonymous, say, with money, if we were saying this where gods was actually referring to the 1%, which in this case they are, then saying gods have more magic / the 1% has more money, therefore the 1% are more human than we are, or the gods matter more as lives, no, regardless how much magic they have or power, this does not make them better in terms of living creatures. Their lives should not hold more worth, but in the society they do, because we have a very clear power structure that's been built out and a fleshed out world. They have all the power, which is very much like the original Greek mythology. But what's also interesting about the original Greek mythology, and might also apply here, is there's a lot of blurred lines between who is a nymph and who is a god, and what either are capable of. And isn't it funny how despite that, the power structure is still heavily stacked against nymphs? I'm not the creator, so I can't speak with really any authority on how this world operates. But it seems to me she's built a very intriguing power dynamic parallel to the real world. I might even dare call it institutional racism, if I'm feeling bold. Which I am. So I will. Now, before anyone starts going, what? Why are you bringing this into... Hear me out. You have a hierarchy and class system solely based around the genetics of cognizant, intelligent life. That, my friends, is kind of textbook racism. Institutionalized racism. Bit uncomfortable when you look at it that way, but it's a tad bit hard to ignore. We can go further into this at a later time, especially as more world information is revealed, but I want you to look back at every time nymphs are mentioned by other characters. The gods constantly talk down to them, or call them trash. They are seen as lesser. Their sole purpose seems to be to serve, and they're even fetishized, as we saw in that little spicy pop-up on Hades' computer about single flower nymphs in the area. It's icky, but it's such a beautiful example of subtle world building. We aren't told that nymphs deal with this kind of objectification and discrimination by those in power. We're shown it. We see it in how Hera and Aphrodite talk about Minthe, which does seem to go beyond who she is as a person. We see it in Megaera's surprise and disdain when she sees Minthe and Hades are public. We even see it in the difference between how Persephone is treated when they assume she is a flower nymph versus when they realize she's a goddess. We also see that while it is a part of society, it's not a worldview held by everyone. This gives us information that while it's widely accepted, it's not, say, an outright law that nymphs are to be treated as lesser. So with that in mind, it's probably more on par with the systemic racism we see in the world today, rather than closer to 55 years ago in America when the Civil Rights Act of '64 had just been passed. 55 years. That's it. We forget it wasn't that long ago. That means America, our president was already 18 when it was enacted. His entire childhood was spent in a time where it was still legal and common to openly discriminate against people by their race. I'm getting off topic, I know, but I feel like people forget that it really was not that long ago. Where was I? Right, systemic racism, not law, but definitely an influence in society, not everyone holding that viewpoint. Hades, for instance. While their relationship is not healthy, Hades does seem to do his best to treat Minthe as an equal. Yay! Good guy. He's got problems, but he's a good guy. I know I rag on him. Because yes, he is going to slip up, and inevitably I will sass him for that, because that's what I do. And also we want our protagonists to grow and strive to be better than what the societal norm is at the time. But just look at the difference between how Zeus treats Thetis and Hades treats Minthe. While Hades does want her to be professional in the office, he treats her like a partner. Zeus treats Thetis as an object. And it's not just because Thetis is the other woman. Thetis is an object to Zeus because to him, she only has one purpose, and that's to serve him. She's a means to an end. She is there as sexy stress relief, and by her own admission, Zeus won't even say so much as goodbye when he leaves for the day. She's to never call it home, and beyond work things, they don't really seem to talk unless they're getting it on, which again is for his purposes more than hers. To Zeus, Thetis exists solely to please him. So, to go back to our two frenemies. Thetis has sabotaged Minthe because Minthe was actually starting to rise up. Minthe had public, exclusive relationship status with a god, while Thetis isn't even allowed to call the house and remains a dirty little secret. Minthe was proof that Thetis could have a better life, but doesn't. And rather than blame Zeus, who is the real reason she's so miserable, rather than leave and find someone who will treat her like a person, Thetis sabotages Minthe. It's a strange psychological self-destructive defense mechanism. It's a form of denial. Rather than be happy for her friend, rather than inquire about it and see how she might also get into a happier state, she sabotages it. And it's probably not the first time one of these two have sabotaged the other in something, though I imagine it's probably not been this level. And yes, this is a toxic friendship. Holy cow, it's a toxic friendship. So why stay friends with someone like this? I actually asked some of you on my Twitter this very question, and while I was somewhat anticipating the results, when I got them, my heart just kind of broke. The second most common answer was that these people were still better than no friends at all, which, as far as we know, Thetis and Minthe really only have each other, except maybe Thanatos, but I'm not entirely sure his role. We just know that they used to hook up when Minthe and Hades weren't exclusive, and they snark about people's fashion choices. Still, not a strong support system there. And the most common answer that I got from you all was that they weren't always bad. And my heart goes out to you, and I just have to first say, it's never always bad. And you really need to take a moment to sort of weigh where the good and the bad is. And if there's more bad than good, then, or even if the bad isn't as frequent as the good, but when it is bad, it's like, holy crap, toxic bad? You still need to get out. And in the theme of it wasn't always bad, I feel like the same can be said for Thetis and Minthe. We have some photo proof of good times on Minthe's computer, and for all the barbs they throw at each other, Minthe does really seem to value Thetis' opinion and advice. She was gonna ask her about Persephone, saying she always knows what to do. So when Thetis asked her out for drinks, while they do zing each other passive-aggressively, Minthe truly did not expect to be outright sabotaged. And to be fair, when Thetis first asked her, she also didn't expect to outright sabotage Minthe. But Minthe is actually kind of happy right now. And while misery loves company, happy sort of expects, or at least wants, everyone else to be happy. When you're genuinely happy, you're not plotting revenge or how to hurt someone. And in the same vein, your brain doesn't fathom anyone might be doing the same to you. Now, bear in mind, obviously, Minthe still has insecurities around Persephone and is not, like, at full happy. But in this moment, she's truly happy. She feels loved. She's getting dinner made for her. The idea that her friend would want to sabotage her in this moment is so unfathomable. Psychology refers to frenemies as ambivalent relationships. And appropriately, it also can't seem to really make up its mind on how it feels about them. Some studies say that these relationships can actually be good for you. Because with those you have an ambivalent relationship with, you tend to be more honest. You're less tentative about the risk of hurting feelings, so you kind of get past that politeness barrier. These people are the sort who also challenge you. They encourage you to be more competitive, to better yourself at all times. But personally, from what I've read, I feel like you could also get these things by practicing vigilant empathy, encouraging honest communication with those you keep close, and making sure that when you hear criticism about yourself, you don't immediately dismiss it. You honestly evaluate it and you check in. Also, these studies, from what I could tell, seem to create these ambivalent relationships through fairly artificial means with complete strangers. So you don't quite get the same toxicity that you would have with someone that you've known for years and years and years. And you often do end up with people who are communicating poorly rather than a more Minthe and Thetis relationship, which is what I tend to think of more when I think of frenemy. Not just someone who annoys you and maybe doesn't encourage you in the way that you prefer to be encouraged. Now, the studies that had findings against these sort of relationships stated that they were more often damaging than those that were outright toxic relationships. Because the problem with ambivalent relationships is their absolute uncertainty. Because you have constant conflicting thoughts and ideas about this person, you're never really sure where you stand with them, and you're always at odds. When someone is outright toxic all the time, you know where you stand with them. You know you can work around to avoid them. When a relationship is ambivalent, you are constantly second guessing, and it's actually a more stressful situation. Yes, it keeps you on your toes, but at a very exhausting cost, and I promise you, there are healthier ways of staying sharp. And unfortunately, it might even take Minthe a while to realize she was openly sabotaged here. When someone isn't always bad and you have all these conflicting feelings pent up, you can't really for certain say if they were being malicious or if they genuinely thought they were acting in good faith on your behalf and made a mistake. And then on top of that, we do know Minthe's got a lot of pride. She does not like to show her emotions. She does not like to show her weakness. The first time Hades got to see it, and we don't know how long they've been off and on, it seems like they've been off and on prior to Persephone for quite some time. And that was the first time Hades had ever seen her jealous. So obviously she's got a lot of pride, she keeps a lot of things close, she doesn't like showing her emotions. I don't doubt that pride will enter into how she reacts to this as well, on top of that whole ambivalent relationship. So there's all this conflicting feelings going on of, do I trust this person? Is she acting in faith? She always gave me good advice before. She always knows what to do. Now imagine that this ambivalent relationship where someone sometimes had very good times with you and sometimes was openly trying to destroy you was the only support system you have. You'd be unknowingly in a state of constant stress. Your worldview would be skewed and your judgment damaged at best. Now, I don't have these discussions to excuse the antagonistic actions of these characters. Let's be very clear about this, because I've noticed a lot of things with like villain origin stories, we get the impression that having empathy for someone means that their actions are forgivable or excusable. That's not what's going on here. Your trauma does not excuse the bad things you've done to people, but it does explain why you did it. What that does do is it makes our antagonists believable and interesting. One of my biggest pet peeves is a villain origin story where you see like a very, very good person become a very, very bad person over the course of like a day or one singular event. I'm looking at you, cursed child, with your Cedric Diggory becoming a Death Eater in that one alternate timeline. Like, what even was that? Are you kidding me? On the other hand, you have things like Fisk from Daredevil, where you see from like a young age he's dealing with abuse, he's dealing with this, and just every little thing in his life and where he goes from that action and how it informs who he becomes, how he becomes the Kingpin, how he becomes the ill intent. Oh, I love that speech. Daredevil has some issues, but I really loved that first season. Oh, so much. It was good. Liked it. Yeah. So it's really wonderful to see these glimpses into the 1,000 little cuts that build a perceived need in Minthe's life for survival by manipulation, that feed insecurity. You may not agree with the actions, but you can see why they happen. This is how you create believable conflict. This is how you build villains or antagonists. And while I do not like Minthe as a person, this is why I find her absolutely fascinating as a character. She's not just
A mythic bitch.
She's a fully rounded character. She's one of her own worst enemies. And in some regards, she's even tragic. I feel like we're gonna see her at points inch towards being better and then spiral. And as she continues to spiral, I'm going to have a Tyra Banks level breakdown.
I was rooting for you. We were all rooting for you. How dare you? Learn something from this. When you go to bed at night, you lay there and you take responsibility for yourself.
Have you ever had one of these ambivalent relationships? What made you realize they were toxic? And what was the final straw that made you get out? What advice would you give to people who might be in a similar situation? As a reminder to all of you, I purposefully do not utilize the fast pass when making these videos because I want them to be available to everyone. So please be mindful of spoilers in the comments. Don't tell people ahead of time. Just don't be that person. Keep on the windy side of care, and until next time, kindred, stay curious. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more of the same, click the like button. Also, apparently YouTube thinks you'd like that one over there. If you like the general cut of my jib, please click subscribe, and if you want to be notified when your subscriptions actually update, ring that little bell.